Recently, I've been thinking a lot about the potential upcoming announcement of a successor to the Nintendo Switch, and I've come to a realization. I think I'd be okay with the 720p Switch too. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting docked mode. I'm not suggesting that when you're playing the Switch 2 on the TV, I would expect it to be playing at 720p resolutions. I think there's a lot of games for the original Switch that already run higher than that when docked, and I think higher than 720p in docked mode is a very reasonable expectation to have of a next-generation system from Nintendo. But, in portable mode, if the screen was only 720p, I think I'd be okay with that. Now, I'm going to be showing a lot of gameplay footage in this video that was captured on a Steam Deck at 800p. That's a little above 720p, I know, but I think it's pretty representative of sub 1080p gaming, and I think if you watch this on, say, the YouTube app on a current Nintendo Switch, or on your phone if it has a similar sort of size screen, I think it'll help get across what I'm trying to say. So, I've been playing a lot of handheld gaming recently across a few different devices, and in different ways, these different devices have kind of crystallized how I feel about the potential screen for a Switch successor. First up, I want to talk about the fact that the rumoured screen for the Switch 2 is an 8-inch LCD screen, and I know a lot of people have been panicking about that because, the OLED screen on the Switch OLED is really nice, and going back to an LCD screen doesn't sound great, because the launch Switch didn't have a great screen. But having been playing the PlayStation Portal recently, which is an 8-inch LCD screen, technology for LCD screens has come a very long way. It's not one-to-one, it's not quite as good as an OLED screen, in my opinion, but it's not half bad. We've seen a lot of improvement in LCD screens, in terms of their quality. I don't think we need to worry about that, but looking at the 8-inch screen on the PlayStation Portal, it feels noticeably larger than the screen on the current Switch, but I've never really been concerned about its resolution. Playing this as a system that is streaming over the internet, I've been much more concerned about whether a game has like a good stable frame rate over my internet connection. Performance has been a much bigger concern to me than whether the game occasionally looks a little blurry or could have been higher resolution. And I think this has kind of been playing out in the way that I've been using devices like the Steam Deck and the Lenovo Legion Go recently. So, the Steam Deck has an 800p screen, and that's a little higher than the 720p screen on the current Switch. A lot of games on the Steam Deck I end up finding have defaulted to 720p anyway if they're games that don't have a native 800p mode designed for them. On the Steam Deck, I can usually not really feel a big difference. Like, technically there is an improvement if you're playing at 800p, but it's negligible on a on a screen like that. I tend to find for a Steam Deck game to feel playable, I want it to run at a good frame rate and, have the kind of performance where it's not got major pop-in, it's not having to do major resolution drop-offs in the far distance. Those kind of technical things are a lot more important to me than the actual output resolution. Playing something like Elden Ring on the Steam Deck, I never really thought about the fact that it was barely running above 720p. The fact that I could get it to a pretty stable 30 FPS, which, is not quite as nice as playing on some of the consoles, but it ran well, and the resolution it wasn't really a thing I thought about. And I think this really crystallized the more I've recently started playing around with the Lenovo Legion Go, which is a device with a much larger screen, a much higher resolution screen, and a much higher frame rate screen. It can potentially do up to 120 frames per second. And it's nice to be able to play more technically demanding games on the Lenovo Legion Go, but I keep finding myself setting the system to play games at 800p and capping at 60 frames a second, because as nice as it is, the thought of going to a higher frame rate or a higher resolution, for most games, the difference is pretty negligible in a handheld environment, and I would much rather have a more stable gameplay experience. I would much rather drain my battery less quickly, have less of a fan whirring in the background, and be able to have a standard predictable experience. anytime I'm trying to get more performance out of one of these sort of handhelds, like the Steam Deck or the Lenovo Legion Go, frame rate is the first thing that I lower. It's the first thing that I'm willing to sacrifice to have a more stable experience. And you sort of get diminishing returns with resolution on smaller screens. Like, I don't want to pretend that there's no difference. There is definitely a visible difference, but as nice as 4K is, on a handheld screen, I would much rather have 800p that runs well. And this all sort of brings me back around to one of the few things we know with a reasonable degree of reliability about the Switch 2 is that the chipset involved supports DLSS upscaling, and I've seen a lot of people going, put a 4K screen on that thing and let it upscale games to 4K and they'll look gorgeous, and I'm not so sure that's what I want, at least in handheld mode. I would much rather have a screen that is capped at 720p so that developers are going, cool, we've got this power to generate extra, frame data. Don't push it into extra pixels, push it into performance. I would much rather have a system that has a better battery life, that lasts longer, that isn't pushing for that, isn't pushing for 1080p or higher when portable, but that is focusing on frame rate and on keeping a good stable frame rate and doing other things that matter more visually to me. I tend to find that, having higher quality textures or things that, a higher draw distance or a more stable frame rate or, a higher density of enemies on screen make a much bigger difference to me than the actual resolution that things are being, output at in my handheld experience. And the more that I've played powerful handhelds that either have to run at, 720p, 800p, or that I get a better experience running them that way, the more I realize I'm very okay with that sort of resolution range in handheld mode as a trade-off to be able to, have a proper portable experience. And sure, when I dock this thing and I have it plugged into the mains, and it can draw as much power as it wants to, overclock things and get a fan running because I'll be on the other side of the room and it won't be such a noise bother. Yeah, kick the resolutions up if you want. Maybe have that something that can happen, but I genuinely mean it when I say that I would not be upset if the Switch 2 launched with a 720p or 800p screen. I really think it's the least of things that matter about making a Nintendo system feel more modern. I think there are much bigger priorities, and Nintendo's gonna cut corners to keep price in a good range, and I think 720p in handheld mode is honestly a fair compromise to make.